get your earballs ready. Welcome to the Greg and Tim Show podcast. Take time to sit back and relax and enjoy the show. Here are your hosts, Greg and Tim.
Hey, welcome back to the Greg and Tim Show. We are back with an episode. Tim, what's today's episode about?
Today we talked to Nelson and his son Fabian Sanderson.
Correct.
And the topic is a little bit more heavy than we usually like to talk about, but some racial issues in Canada. And we're going to get right into it. But the conversation was quite amazing. I thought it was really good.
Yeah. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. If you like the video, hit the subscribe button, comment on your favorite part, and let's just get right into the video with Nelson and Fabian Sanderson. Roll it.
Well, welcome to the studio, Nelson Sanderson. Fabian Sanderson, it is so great to have you here.
We have 3 Sandersons in the studio.
We have 1, 2, 3, only one non-Sanderson.
But my name starts with an S.
S, so we have all S's. That's right. So the reason why, and I want to get right into this, just to clarify for the people out there that are watching and listening, usually we start a little bit slow. We like to talk a lot about the just chit-chat.
Yep.
And
a lot about nothing.
A lot about nothing for the first 15, 20 minutes. And I just wanted to get into, this is going to be a little bit of a different interview. And I talked to Greg about this, that this is an important topic we're going to talk about today. And we are going to get to some lighter things as time goes on. But I really want to let people know the reason why I wanted to have you two in studio today and have this discussion, because I do think it's a really important discussion in our province and in our country to have. So Nelson, you are and have been an usher, a deacon in our church for quite a few years. And Fabian is also involved in the Indigenous community and in our church that we attend. And you've been doing that for quite a while. And you are also very, very important members of the Indigenous community in our province of Manitoba in the city of Winnipeg. Is that correct?
Well, yes.
And because some of the history behind the church, behind the Indigenous culture is such that sometimes there's a clash between Indigenous people and the church because of some of the history that's gone on in the past. But you, and I've told this to you before when we talked, but you've managed to be a very, very pivotal member of both. You are a very well-respected member of our church. And you are also a well-respected member of Indigenous community, specifically the Metis community, and you have been for a number of years. And I've said that I really commend you, specifically Nelson and Fabian too, that you're able to straddle both communities. And because of how we have seemed to not come together as cultures, that there's the Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and there seems to be that division, you've managed to kind of straddle both. And that's why I have you in studio, because I want to ask you some questions that would maybe help the viewer get a better insight into that dynamic. So first off, I just want to ask you a question. Who is Nelson Sanderson?
Well, Nelson Sanderson was born in St. Laurent, Manitoba in 1951 and moved away from St. Laurent when I was about 2 or 3 years old, moved to St. Eustache, Manitoba. And I speak French, I speak Ojibwe, and I speak English. And we have another language, we call it the Michif language, I speak that language also. It's very different from the 3 languages. But I'm been a family man now for the past 45 years, married in 1979. I have my son to my left here, Fabian, and I have a daughter, Natalie. I have an older son, Colin, lives in British Columbia, and been involved quite a bit, like you say, in the Aboriginal community. Was the president of the Indian Métis Friendship Center back in 1996 to 2000, and then I guess I was part of maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 Aboriginal organizations in those days of maybe between 94 to 2000, 2001. But still involved with the Manitoba Métis Federation and have a lot of fun doing it.
Same question for you. Who is Fabian Sanderson?
Well, thank you for that, Tim. Fabian Sanderson, CEO of First Peoples Economic Growth Fund. Bit about my history. So obviously went to the University of Manitoba, graduated with my Bachelor of Commerce. I also went to Red River College, where I had my university stream. Specialization was just general special, based on university studies, so that I can get into the actual U of M. And after that, went into banking with RBC, and bit of personal, some small business, some commercial financing, and that's how I got into the field I'm in with economic development in the First Nation community specifically. So, and of course, son to Nelson Sanderson, got my own family, wife, 2 sons who are very not baseball players, but they're avid fighters with mixed martial arts. So it's been awesome run doing that. And boxing kind of runs in the family. I used to fight years back, and that was kind of following after my dad, who did some boxing as well. And so that was a blast. So, you know, it's kind of one of those things, right? Generational, that you just pass on and on. And so now, you know, obviously they, you know, throat punches hurt worse than their locks, but
Yeah.
How old are your boys?
9 and 11.
9 and 11. Yeah. So they're getting pretty big.
Oh, absolutely. They're
So you guys both boxed?
Yeah.
Like professionally, amateurly, amateurly, that's probably not even a word, but you know what I mean.
yeah. No, I never went pro. Mine was amateur, but fought in Canada, and actually had a fight in the US, which was a
Very
blast.
cool.
Whole different experience. Boxing is way different out there. You know, the passion, just everything is amped up in the States. Wrestling, you know, you name it. And it's, so it's great to get that experience heading down there, and, you know, just the fight nights, right? They play it up so much in the US.
And you mean real wrestling?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Not WWE wrestling.
Not WWE.
Not actual non-wrestling.
Yeah. No.
So maybe this question is for both of you. When you're part of both communities, how do you manage to stay, let's say, a Christian and someone in the Indigenous community? How do you manage to take the two and blend them so that you're both 100% into both?
Right. You know, it's not that it's a tough balance. There's a lot of First Nation communities, a lot of Metis communities, you know, predominantly some of them Roman Catholic. Obviously, all the things that are going on right now with the Roman Catholic Church. But, you know, in terms of almost trying to establish the difference between the two, and, you know, who you are as a person, as an individual, your belief systems, and you know, and really what you model is honestly one of the best ways to try to communicate that and establish that distance. You know, and they had obviously the Pope, who apologized on behalf of all of Christendom, which, you know, anybody who knows Catholicism versus Christianity, that's always been a strong debate. And, you know, how you identify, I think, is really important. And you know, obviously not being offensive to anybody who is Roman Catholic, but there are some differences with respect to who you are as a Christian versus somebody who practices Catholicism, you know, in terms of thoughts, perspectives on the Virgin Mary, for instance, or confession of sins to a priest, you know, and those types of belief systems. You know, can you buy your way into heaven? But all throughout the Indigenous communities, you know, there is still a large number who do follow Christianity or Roman Catholicism. So, you know, it's obviously a tough balance when it comes to somebody who's dealing with some hurt and some pain from what the church had caused to them. That is something that, you know, I don't tread, you know, lightly. Well, I do tread lightly on, I should say. And so when you're dealing with somebody like that, you know, who whether they follow the Red Road Anishinaabe teachings, and it's something that you have to handle with care and treat honestly just like anybody else, like any other religion in the world, but realizing that there is that sensitivity there where there's a pressure point, right? Like a cut with salt, where it's going to open up and maybe trigger some things that took place. And honestly, one of the best ways to do it is knowing the history, understanding the history, and letting them know that you know the history, that you acknowledge the things that took place, right? And with me, you know, I'm very fortunate, you know, with my dad. He was involved in the schooling system, and, you know, I'll let him share about some of the stuff that took place. But when you can't even speak your own language, you know, and if you dial back further to when, you know, somebody who was an Indian had to, have a piece of paper from an Indian agent just to go hunting for his family. And obviously there's worse things that you can go into, but dialing back and not chasing too many rabbits, as somebody who is operating in this, there's obviously a fair bit of, we'll call it conservatism when it comes to how I operate, because obviously I have my beliefs. And if somebody ever asked me, I would love to share it. I'd love to share who I am, what I believe, and that I believe in Jesus. But obviously it's communicating on a whole different level and being careful, because it's so easy to be labeled as just, someone who's a fruitcake or whatever you want to call them, in their systems. And that's sometimes how, outsiders will view you as, he's one of them, and he just, he wants nothing better than to just come and convert me. No, I just want to show love to you guys. You know what I mean? And that's really what it's about. And obviously what the church I tend to preaches, which is love, accept, forgive, right? And I feel when you do that, people know when you're genuine. They know your authenticity, and they know that you really do care, and and the passion shows, and especially with the work that I do, in terms of helping First Nations to start up companies so that they can get out of any slump, because for too long people have been held back in almost a victim mentality. And it's great to see so many progressive chiefs, and I work with some excellent professionals who go out there and they're so business minded, they're forward thinking, and they only want to see generational legacy in terms of wealth creation, or solid family and legacy through family, as opposed to that generational poverty that they've experienced for so many years. So that's, and like I said, it's something you handle with kid gloves, but at the same token, it's, you need to be so real with people. And I'll end in that.
So I'm going to get Nelson's perspective on this in a second. But before, I'm going to ask you, because you are also involved in the church, but you're also involved in your work. You help Indigenous businesses build wealth, find ways to operate. And so you kind of are helping in more than just one area. Right. How do you find you were talking about a case earlier today, but how do you find your work? Is it challenging? What are some of the benefits of what you do, and some of the where you find the reason for what you do in a daily basis?
Yeah. So ultimately it's rewarding. I mean, through our programs, because they're so beneficial, and they're unlike any other, right? And so we deal obviously with non-traditional financing, more of a developmental lender. So obviously our target market is completely different. We're kind of the ones that sometimes the banks won't touch. Sometimes they will, depending on the deal that we're working through. But ideally we were created because there's so many barriers to First Nations, right? And I mean, anything from even a cell phone, and not having that understanding of, if I tell these guys, go smoke a pipe, I'm not paying this bill. We'll put it like that, okay? And they're not thinking, okay, this is going to affect my credit, because there hasn't been that teaching. Mm-hmm. In the school system as a whole, there hasn't been that teaching. And, it's great. I love being invited to schools, honestly, to teach on that with these kids, to tell them, make sure your kid, even at the high school level, because grade 12s, they have no idea how to handle
So your banking
credit.
background can help with a lot of that.
Absolutely. And that's been a huge passion of mine, because, I even fell victim to that a bit in my own life, and so being able to give back in that measure is awesome. But having somebody who comes up to you, and maybe they might not have enough equity, right? I mean, you look at a restaurant, right? Maybe the banks probably right now are, usually it's 30 to 40%, but now they might be looking for 50, 60, right? Because it's so high risk, and that's where we come into play. So our stake is definitely risk investing when it comes down to the economic development that we're looking for. And so we take the big risks that others won't. And when we pair our financing in, we're able to subordinate debt that helps to take those ventures to the banks, so that, say for a community, maybe if they're looking for some financing from other vendors, they can use us and almost stake us as an equity position, because we have zero interest loans, we have grants, and that's what we've tried to leverage. And that's a big part of our programming. And like I said, when it comes to the little guy who's looking to start up just a small mom and pop shop, or if they want a hot dog stand, sometimes, if they come to us, it's just all in-house, as long as they have a bit of equity in the stake. Sometimes it's sweat equity, depending on how we work that deal. It's probably one of the best things for that reason. And the other side of it is seeing, honestly, some of that generational legacy being built through even what we do. There's I was there one time with a client of ours, and he said, "You know what, Fabian?" He said, "It's the first time that I ever really thought of this. He said, because I haven't. And, he's, well known in the community. He's been chief several times of his community, but he, great man, really well respected. But he had a grandson of his walking through his business. And he said, one day I can't wait to work here. And he said, it didn't hit me. And then a couple of days later it did. And he said, I thought, like, how amazing is that? Because you do not hear that a lot in the Indigenous community. And we have several who have been rising up, a lot of companies, and some that we haven't even known about because we do startups, expansions, and acquisitions. And it's such a special thing to see when that comes to fruition and you see the results of what you're doing. And that's the best. And it's,
For
and
sure.
we have, and the big thing too is, like, the team that we've built, the directors that we have, everybody's on board, and it's very fluid. And it's so easy to work when you have an organization that is all on board with your purpose and your cause of what you're trying to build. And seeing that ACTEV take place in the province, and right now, we're scratching the surface of kind of what could take place, especially when you look at some of the urban reserves that are being started up, and I guess the stereotype of what takes place on an urban reserve, right? Like the way that people have always perceived it versus if they ever walked into us and seen our business unit and how we function, and and the organizations within that. It's phenomenal to see. Years back, I went to a conference that wanted to focus on urban reserves, and and everybody was saying, you're not going to pay taxes. Man, the amount of fees that everybody has to pay, at the end of the day, it all works out. But like I said, it's more of that that restoration, whether you want to call it reconciliation or whatever it is, of having that rewarded back to First Nations, and because a lot of them, if you don't know, they have TLE, Treaty Land Entitlement, where they can get different parcels of land through that and kind of negotiate that with the government. And really what that does, it really helps us set up that situation, because if you've ever been to a remote First Nation, I mean, you've seen how desolate it can be and how brutal the conditions can be. And you've probably always heard the term of they all live for free, and all this stuff that's been out there, because there's not that understanding, right, of really what the conditions are and what it's like. And imagine being stuck on maybe an island somewhere where you have you might have some schooling, but the whole system is broken. Maybe you might be growing up without your dad. You might be stuck in this.
You only have ice roads.
Absolutely. And so you get to the age where maybe you're 35 or you're 47. You're like, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? I have no schooling. I have no background, no experience. But then you get an idea. Hey, why don't I start up a burger shop here? And then who can help make this happen? Well, the bank's not going to take you on. You have no credit, or you have terrible credit because maybe you've borrowed, you've messed it up. And that's where we get to come in and get to talk with them and coach them. And we have other programs too that can provide mentorship, whether it's in finances. And so once it comes to that, that's where you see the real magic kind of happen.
Yeah.
And it's so great to build that. Anyway,
I think one of the things you said was the generational thing. Me and Tim actually talked about it on Drew Dudley's podcast, I believe, or the Drew Dudley episode.
Adam Bighill as well, for generations.
And also with Adam Bighill, and the fact that we have the influence over the next generation, but the last generation also has the influence over us, right? So like you growing up were influenced by your previous generation, but then you had to make that decision to change the trajectory, I think I could say, of where your life was going to go, right? So you had the option to continue.
His life was going to go.
So it's point.
But that's it, right? So like your generational Nelson was very much like you had a choice, right? You could either keep going down whatever path your father and his father and so on went, or you could try to carve out your own path. And I kind of get that feeling from what Fabian is saying, is that like he's now doing that not just for his own family now, but he's also doing it for other families.
See, many of our people have the crying game only because of that, just the way they were treated.
Yeah.
So they're very good-hearted people.
Yeah.
If you know the First Nation and if you know the Métis community, but if you've been mistreated, you feel that there must be somehow a good person in the back of that curtain, but you can't find them. So you go either to alcoholism or to drugs or anything. So if you're a little stronger, like my dad was, I would say, an alcoholic.
Okay.
And he tried very hard. He supported his family.
Yep.
But he had a lot of issues from growing up in St. Laurent, and the bigotry there was there, and they kept him down. So he never really, he wanted to get to stay up there and be, like everybody else, maybe start a small business, all those things. My dad wanted to do that. My older brothers told me that, he had dreams.
Yeah.
But I never followed up on those dreams because it got to him. In my case, I'm sorry.
So I'm going to interrupt you there,
Sure.
because this is a question I have that's further down my list, but I'm going to bring it now.
Okay.
And I want to get back to the whole thing of how you straddle both your Christian walk and being Indigenous. But I want to go and ask the question, how did you, because you're saying part of your family members, they wanted to do something, but they just couldn't,
their hands were tied.
weren't able to, their hands were tied, whatever it is. So what enabled you, and Greg said this very well, you not only broke the cycle, you instilled it in your son, who used it in his personal life, and now he is touching other, not only people, but businesses, and you're the start of that. You're the catalyst for it. And this is why I want to have you on this podcast to talk about that. But so why and how were you able to break that cycle?
I think I told you in a bit of a message a while back, but the thing is that I was raised in St. Eustache, Manitoba, Métis community, but very, very French, if you will. And there was a lot of bigotry and racism in that town, where they be really mean to me as a little boy, calling me un petit sauvage means un petit sauvage noir, which is in translation little black Indian. So they weren't kind, and kids would tease me with that. So it never really affected me until I got older, and that I realized that, you see, my mom and dad held it away from us that we were First Nation blood. And yes, we spoke Ojibwe in the house, and we spoke French, and we spoke English, sometimes all at the same time.
In the same sentence.
I get confused with English just with Tim, but
I always get confused with the English.
The Michif language.
Yeah.
But having said that, I was raised in that town, and a lot of terrible things happened to me as I grew older. But then when I moved into the city at the age of 12, it was such an exciting time. Like I got to know that there were some great people out there, and there were some good teachers out there.
Yep.
And so I started learning that, yes, there's such a thing as racism. I didn't know how to put my finger onto the nasty things that were happening to me in the small town.
you thought they were just picking on you
they
as
were
a
just
child.
picking on me, and after a while, I was answering to them.
Yeah.
But it's funny today. But that time, I guess it wasn't really that funny. But enjoyed my beginning there.
Yeah.
And moved to the city, and then got married in '79, and then from there on, I started putting my I started reading more, and when I was reading, I read about why they were picking on me, and I learned the word discrimination, maybe a little old, right? Maybe in my 30s, but still, I thought, well, maybe I can fight this, and maybe I can help my people, because all of a sudden I knew my people.
Yeah.
All of a sudden I knew the Manitoba Métis Federation and the First Nation and the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, which I became very familiar with, and with the chiefs.
So you weren't on your own anymore.
And with the chiefs, so I wasn't on my own anymore.
Yeah.
And there was my side, their side, but our side we're together, the First Nation and the Métis.
Yeah.
So I started learning more and getting connected to the organizations, which was the Manitoba Métis Federation, and of course the Indian and Métis Friendship Center, where I became president in 1996. Up to the year 2000. But we made a lot of changes when I was in there, and we had I believe we had about 2 or 3 conferences on gangs back in '93, where it really started. So
Okay.
we put it together, and I had kids from 14 to 29 that attended the conference there that we had, and my daughter was part of it. I'm not sure if you were, Fabian.
For the which one?
For erasing racism.
Yeah, no, I'm being there.
Yeah.
It gave me the day off school.
Awesome. But yeah, we did quite a bit, and from there on, I started getting connected with the city and with the province. The province gave me a position on the Addiction Foundation of Manitoba, where I sat for 4 years, and also other organizations, First Nation, non-First Nation, and learned quite a bit. But getting back to this, and I really have to, when you spoke about being a speaker and just really knowing how to get up to the mic, and I didn't know this, and I'll tell you, I was so frightened of this at one given time.
Yeah.
Until my friends, they said, Nelson, you should join the Anishinaabe Toastmasters.
Nice.
And I said, where do they meet? Well, right now they're meeting at the Royal Bank, 12th story downtown. And I figured, well, I'll go down there. But most of the guys I knew there, they were executives in their own suits, right?
Yeah.
And oh my God.
How'd you show up? Were you in a suit?
Just jeans and a jacket.
Jeans and a jacket, that's fine. Yeah.
So I walk in there, and whoa, my heart is just like it's going to spring out of my chest, right? And I got no spit in my mouth or nothing.
Yeah.
So and they said, well, Mr. Sanderson, would you like to say a word?
No.
Oh my God.
That's the face that Tim had when we started the podcast.
That's the face I make every time we start a podcast.
I look around me. Mr. Sanderson, would you like to come up? And they asked me to come up.
Yeah.
And they gave me a word, whether it was cup, whatever, right? Yeah. So they said, can you come and speak on this for 2 minutes? Yeah. And I went up there, and I was looking. But, it took me at least a month or 2 months.
Yeah.
But 2 months, I was able to speak in front of people.
Yeah.
And it opened me up, and it opened also different channels where I could go and speak for this organization, or go down to Vancouver and speak in front of judges and lawyers and everything else. So I was really happy. But the first time I ever tried to speak, it was on this radio station CJOB had. Okay. It was, God, I knew there was a speaker there. He had sort of an English accent.
I think I know who you're talking about.
I forget his name right now.
Not Adler. The one before Adler.
Before Adler.
Peter Warren.
Peter Warren. That's correct.
Peter Warren was speaking.
Good memory.
And I was working afternoon shift, right? So I'm in the morning and I'm listening to it. Now I want to speak because what they're speaking on, I really want to say a few things on it.
Yeah.
So I call it. Well, I dialed it, and I'm waiting for the answer. And all of a sudden, we get in the other line. It's Peter Warren. Hello, who are you speaking to? I says to him, Nelson Sanderson. Yes, Mr. Sanderson, what would you like to say?
That's boy.
Oh my God! It was
You're on the air.
I had a hot potato in my mouth and I couldn't open it. You know why? I turned around and I.
Oh no!
And that was Nelson Sanderson from.
Ladies and gentlemen, Nelson Sanderson from St. Eustache, Manitoba.
And I knew I had to really learn.
You should have started speaking French
Yeah,
or Ojibwe
Je ne sais pas.
or Anishinaabe.
or Anishinaabe. Yeah.
So I'll tell you a story.
Sure.
This reminds me of a story. I sing at church on sometimes, and the first time I tried to sing when I was a kid, first 3 times my legs would shake, my knees would touch, and nothing came out of my voice. Nothing. Literally, the first time I sang, nothing exited my mouth for any kind of anything. It just opened up my mouth. nothing came out. So, but like you say, you do it once, you do it twice, it gets easier, and repetition, right? To the
That's
point
right.
where you're comfortable standing in front of people and talking. And it's also interesting that you said you were in a room full of people with suits.
Yeah.
I think we did an interview with a lady that the words of advice she had was, you become who you hang out with. We said if there's one bit of advice you could give to anyone, what is it? And that's what she said.
Yeah.
And you were hanging out with a bunch of people in suits. Positive or negative, you became something that you surrounded yourself with.
You became a suit.
Yeah, you became a suit to the point where you look great here. You're in a suit, and
we're dressed up in t-shirts
you're
and
the best looking guy in the group. So anyway, if I could go back then to the original question that I asked, that Fabian answers for you too, along the lines you became a Jesus believer, a Christian, and you became in both communities. You were in the Indigenous community with the Metis people, and you were a Christian. How did you manage to be equally and fully part of both groups?
See, in our community, in the Metis community from St. Laurent and from St. Eustache, there were either Roman Catholic, Anglicans, not so many,
Yep.
but Roman Catholic. But what I didn't like about the Roman Catholic Church at that given period was that there was no focus on me as a child, like maybe because of the color of my skin at that given period in St. Eustache, Manitoba. But a lot of young brown-skinned boys like me were walking around those streets and that town, not being respected that much from either the nuns or from the priests, and many of our teachers were nuns. So so it really took me away. I was trying to really build a relationship with the Roman Catholic Church because I loved the little pictures they gave me.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Joseph, Mary, and they were beautiful pictures.
Yep.
But having said that, so I really never got that many of them, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And the priest wasn't that really kind to me. Well, in a way, I kind of like it today, right?
Yeah.
Right.
after what's happened to many of the children that were.
Yeah.
So, but I made I don't know. I followed I really loved, as a boy, I really loved Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And there was something about learning more about him that when we moved to the city, we were still going to Roman Catholic, okay? And I still went. And then when I met my wife is when I actually changed to become a born-again Christian. And she made that big change in me, which is, she's a strong lady.
A good woman. Eh?
She worked very hard, and then she really turned me in. But, that's what I enjoy today. And I've been now going to the same church for 30 years.
Wow.
And I've been volunteering, I'd say, for a good 20, 25 years.
That's fantastic.
And I'm there 2 services every Sunday, and I love it.
So
Yeah, you tell me where not to sit, where to sit. Can't go there, can't go here.
that's not true.
No?
No,
But
he
they-
takes
you know-
to the first available seat and sits you down and tells you to stop singing because everybody else, there's professionals up on the stage.
No. No one tells me to stop singing.
No, everybody's allowed to sing. So you've been volunteering for 20 to 25 years, you
Yeah.
said. Do you think that volunteering has helped you grow in your faith in the church? And if so, has it made it easier for you to share your faith as well with others?
There is no question.
Yeah.
From the time of Pastor Cam, Pastor Leon, and then Pastor Zach,
Yeah.
and from the beginning, I became very strong, so strong that I had a good friend. He was a fireman. Well, he was a fireman at that given time, but now he's retired. But he came to me. He phoned me one night, and he was at work, and he said he had a sore on his arm that wouldn't heal.
Okay.
Now, here's a fireman that, has quite a bit of work to do.
Yeah.
So he says, Nelson, he said, it's not healing.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I'm thinking of he says, I'm at that point, it was about 6 weeks to 8 weeks, maybe longer,
Yeah.
that he was suffering with this infliction on his arm. And you know what? He says, I feel like really like doing himself in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, whoa, Fred, my good friend. And I said, don't thinking that way. And then he said the magic word that got me going. He says, Nelson, he said, I used to go to church when I was a boy.
Yeah.
And that was my way in.
Yeah.
I says, hey, Fred, why don't you come to our church on Sunday?
Yeah.
I said, we have Pastor Cam there. I said, he can pray on you. I says, and you know what? He can heal that. Are you sure, Nelson? Well, I said, I can't be sure, but I'll go with you. No, it's Wednesday night.
It's Richard
And-
Healing School.
Yeah, Wednesday night, yeah. So I took him to healing school,
Yeah.
and he came, and Pastor Cam, well, we went to school, and then we stayed a little longer, and Pastor Cam prayed on him and told him what to do and things to say and repetition,
Yep.
in his house. And on the Bible and everything, read some sources from the Bible. So he phoned me a week later. He said, Nelson, it's closed up and it's healed.
Wow.
Oh wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we were really, like, you know what? He's been coming to our church now for 21 years.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah. That's a
Yeah.
great story.
Yeah.
Question, and I thank you for that answer very much. Just maybe I'll direct this question to Fabian. I read a book by an author called the name of Miles McPherson in the States. And this, of course, the dynamic in the U.S. is a bit different between the cultural groups that it tends to be the African American and quote unquote white population that are at odds. And in Canada, it tends to be the Indigenous and non-Indigenous that are at odds. And I hear a lot of statements from both where people have distrust in the Indigenous community towards the non-Indigenous, and people have no understanding from the non-Indigenous to the Indigenous people and make comments like, why don't they just get a job? Why don't they just get over it? And these kinds of things. And there seems to be a disconnect. And the book that he wrote is called The Third Option, which is basically, instead of having negative racial opinions, to come together and have discussions. That people don't want things fixed. They just want to come together and understand another person. Empathy for the plight of what might have happened to their parents or their parents' parents. And there's not enough of that discussion happening. And there's just two groups of people that tend to just to go on distrusting each other. Is there any way, first of all, would you agree with that premise? And secondly, what kind of ways can we really get together as communities to understand and empathize without trying to solve problems?
Yeah, definitely a loaded question. And, from being in this for many years, and seeing what's taking place. I mean, honestly, I think one of the most special things is when you have two people from separate backgrounds who come into a situation. There's no walls, there's no barriers, there's no judging. Who are you? And I know what you're all about already. So having somebody in that background is a special thing. In short explanation, I got to be a part of this thing called the Commonwealth Study, Duke of Edinburgh, and so they took 300 people from around the globe, in all throughout the Commonwealth, and we all came together in Canada. Now, in short, one of the most special things about this group, as much as it was a business study and just a really insane, engaging tour, it was nonstop, was the fact that all these people from different backgrounds, when we all came together in this, there was no judging.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knew each other from a hole in the ground, right? So even your background, they weren't like, you're probably like this, or you're like that. It was just, we want to know what you're about. We got separated into certain groups, and like our one group with 18 people had 11 countries. So having that type of discussion was amazing. And the big thing about it is that a lot of it was circling around Canada, the Indigenous communities, what took place here. And nobody was judging at that point in time. In fact, a lot of the time it was educating what took place. We had one fellow in there who actually was from Manitoba. And I don't know if it was supposed to be that way, because I think you're supposed to be, at least a bordering province.
Right.
But he was also very familiar, so it was great. He would ask me, can I talk about this? Because he was really passionate about it, because he knew a lot of the history, and so it was great to have that engagement. But there was nothing that was saying, you're such a victim, you're this, you're that. But as we went on through the discussions and said, like, everybody at this point has been colonized in all of these areas. Obviously, some of the UK people were like, well, we were the ones doing the colonizing, so that's a whole different story. but the best part about it was, we could still have those discussions and be very open with it. And they were very open with it. But out of everybody in there, they always asked, why? Why are the First Nations people still being oppressed? Like, what is wrong? Why are they still down? He said, one of my friends from India, he said, Fabian, he's like, I am an Indian, and he started off with, I'm not under your Indian Act, and I had to mess with him, of course. I said, yes, you are. He said, no, I'm not. I said, no, I'm joking. I'm just being lighthearted here. And he said, but why do you have it? So I had to explain to him how everything came to being, right?
Yeah.
We went to quite a few things. Now, obviously, throughout North America, and with Christopher Columbus and everything, discovering America and everything like that.
Yeah.
But down to the nitty gritty of what took place in residential schools and through the whole system, and the fact that out of everybody in the world, we have something, of course, called treaties that are here. And so something I think that's almost a negative effect to this, of having a treaty is a society where you have all of my people who, back in the day, a lot of them, they weren't, when all the colonization took place and kids were taken from homes and all this was taking place, their livelihood was taken away.
Yeah.
Their work ethic was stolen, not just culture, right? Because everybody focuses on culture, which is a huge thing.
Yeah.
And that's something I meant to touch on earlier about the fact that I'm so proud of our culture. And we're honestly one of the only cultures in the world. You go anywhere in the world, and they have an established culture. They have books written. They have this, they have that. You can go and get, receive, educational courses on it.
Right.
We're finally getting there. But out of every area in the world, we're one of the only ones where there was so much oppression on that. And you can't really just go out anywhere, right? And languages that were taken out. I mean, you name it. I don't want to get too far into that. But but explaining to them, what took place and how literally just that work ethic was taken, and again, which is so exciting about what I do, but when you beat someone down into that situation and, you're stuck, especially, and honestly, even a community outside, 2 hours outside of Manitoba, it's hard enough to get to the city.
Yeah.
So when you're isolated in that situation, you're stuck down in that model. And it's hard to crawl out of. It really is, because everybody says, well, just go to school, get an education. You have no idea the pressures, the gang pressures, or the fact that there's broken families and you have grandmas raising kids and they're trying their best and their families love them and even their parents, but their parents are affected from all these effects that have taken place. And so explaining that to him, he finally said, like, especially after the end of the 2 weeks, he sat me down at the very last day and he said, now I get it.
Yeah.
Now I get why this happened. He said, because in India, we were oppressed. We had people die. We had all this. He said, but we moved on. He said, now, we're the biggest population in the world. They just took number one. And he said, now I get it. He said, but they never taught any of this in our schooling system. He said, we've never heard about it. And some of the people in our group didn't even know who we are, didn't know we existed, and you try to explain to them, they're like, no, we have no idea who you are. But talk about a culture that was erased or trying to be erased from history, and now rebuilding on it, it's tough because you don't have, look to all these examples. Now we're finally getting some people right who are some strong business leaders, and it's amazing. You know, obviously there's chiefs of the past that people will focus on, really strong leaders. You know what I'm saying? But
Right.
I'm talking about, we don't have, you know, it's like, oh, here's the Warren Buffett. We have some people who are obviously very affluent, and we have some First Nations that are very progressive. But we're talking about stuff that was built in the last, 100 years. Right, 50 years, whatever you want to say. I mean, people don't realize how, you dial back 50 years and how close all of this still is.
Still fresh.
Where the last residential school closed down, in
64, we became human beings.
Yeah, exactly. Right, but you look at 1994, 95, 96, and that's kind of where things were rolling up, and so you still had people who, it was funny when my dad talked about it, but how you don't realize what people are like, what they're saying to you, right? Like, because when I went to school, I grew up, and they're like, get out of your Indian kid, and that type of talk that you go for. And I know I'm way off topic on this already. I'll dial back in.
No, keep talking.
But and you see the racism from even down the street, and not realizing why my dad didn't want me associating with certain people. Because of the effects that it had on him, and the effects he knew it would have on me, and trying to shelter me and trying to protect me from that. And obviously, like it was always a good thing being around family, but even on that, that breakdown. So dialing back into that conversation that we had, and having somebody from a completely different background, all you had was somebody willing to listen. There was no barriers. There was no, oh, I know what he's going to say next, and I'm just going to make some assumptions and, about what he's talking about. And, oh, I know where he's at. Nothing like that. There was no judgment, right? Just zero. And that's what made it so special. And that's what helped us all, honestly, to bond. And so I think on that notion of when you have somebody in that situation, you bring parties together that they're not judging each other. They're just trying to come to maybe a solution or some ideas. It's very special. They hold things like ideation sessions and whatnot and all of that. But when you have something like this on that level, I think that it would be so positive. The engagement would be so productive in that measure, and would come up with probably some of the most amazing solutions and ideas that you possibly could, and maybe that haven't even been thought of, because everybody always thinks, well, we already know. But there's always something new you can do. And that's one thing, that we always talk about, especially in the organization. We're always changing. We're growing. We're a living, breathing organization. We're going to always continue to try to adapt to whatever the scenario is. But like I said, that I feel is something that's so powerful to get in with a whole nother dynamic, and that's really what it creates when you're in that situation. And honestly, it almost opened up my mind, it really took me to a different state where, I wasn't judging anybody. I wasn't thinking like, I know what this guy's going to say, right? Because often if I get into a discussion with somebody, and they say certain things, right, that you just are kind of off kilter, and you probably don't agree with, and whatever, which is fine, because that's what also creates a really good discussion, right? When you have two
100%.
people who can
Freedom to share
disagree,
ideas
absolutely,
without getting
right, and
pushed back.
And get that iron to sharpen iron, and also, I've been in a situation on the other end where I come in not knowing what I should know, and then I get corrected on it. You know what I mean? And so, including me being quite embarrassed about their own history too, with regard to India and Pakistan, or in Africa, and things that are taking place there, and so everybody can learn from everybody, and that's the one thing you never want to get into, is that state of. But the world we live in, everybody thinks they know everything. They want to always be right, and that's just the condition of man. Obviously, you wouldn't do what you did if you didn't think it was right. In your own head.
The one thing you touched on earlier was that you live the life of love, accepting, forgiving. Right. And I think that really lends to kind of what you're talking about right now. You went to a place with people that you didn't understand, and they also didn't understand you, right?
Yeah.
But they, by the sounds of it, practiced love, accept, forgive, and they allowed you to share. You allowed them to share, to provide those kinds of feelings towards each other.
Absolutely, yeah, and common ground, right?
Yeah,
it's such a. It's tough when you go against, say, opposing parties in any scenario situation, whether it's politics or anything in life, when you find that common ground, and that's one thing we did have, was everybody at this point had experienced some form of colonization of all of these countries. And so we had that and learning about the differences. And there was other indigenous communities from around the world too, whether it was New Zealand or Australia. And so that was cool to engage.
So the UK was there as well.
Absolutely.
So everybody else, like Australia, India, Canada, all these places were colonized by the UK. What did the UK bring in that discussion?
One person.
Sorry to put you on the spot about that.
So, honestly, like, relationships and showing how much they cared, because no kid's born racist, no kid's born to discriminate, and so everybody coming to the table, at this level of professionalism, you would expect what you would expect, but it was so much more in terms of that engagement, being like, like it was awful what happened. We never want to see history repeat itself. And so you see the generations that have come down who are like, why would this ever happen? Who would ever condone this type of behavior? And talk about encouraging, genuine people, right? Like who are just, hearts opening and being so honest and which was very powerful to see on that end, and seeing them say like, this is like messed up. Yeah, is the terminology I'll use in this podcast. I won't repeat what they said.
It's okay. It would get just
we're in a British
anyway.
pub
it's fine.
out there, it'd be some different language, but one person I got to know and very well, so she's of Indian descent. She's from Delhi, and so they live in the UK right now, and so she lives in London. Her parents in Birmingham, and so we got close in this trip, and it was great to have those discussions on how honestly she's living there, quote unquote, not amongst the enemy, but against somebody who had a very negative effect in her society, and it was great to see that perspective that she brought from her home country, the things that they experienced there, to now where she's living and where her parents are residing, and even though they're professionals in their industry, that they're still feeling some form of discrimination. So even though, and that of course is from different generations and different obviously different individuals, not ones that were involved in this study, but obviously in some of the other levels, which you'll see in all society, right? Whether, it's somebody who is uber rich that doesn't want to associate with anybody who's middle class because they think they're better, those types of, situations. But it was great to see that engagement of that section of the UK, and having somebody who was from India who was kind of still experienced that and still had it on a day-to-day basis of, how she was feeling it, and in terms of trying to find a sense of community out there, which she said, she's never really had. And obviously in her type of work too, really tough to get that sense of community. But, just the fact that you're in that situation, it was kind of like a real eye opener, I guess, is what it was when you look at that overall encompassing factor of the UK and what they have. But again, going back to some of the other individuals, some I still message them regularly, and
you said you had did you have a WhatsApp group?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you still participate in that?
All the time. Yeah. So we're messaging, we're video calling, and
that's
there's
fantastic.
People all over the place. And even way out in you take a place like Malta, you know what I mean? Which is kind of cool, because you think about Paul, right? And and missionary work way back, the Bible days, right?
Sure.
Like that was an island. And so it was cool because one of them, Paula, she took a shot of this one, I can't remember if it was like a cross or whatever with Christ or something like that. But it was like a statue that they had there, and it was on Easter that they took this thing, and it was just really cool to see. And I thought, wow, what history that they have way back there on that side of the world, especially where they have these monuments and structures that were built ages back. But it's, and that's, like I said, that's just one of the things that kind of opens your mind to how open people are, right, to those discussions. And now I'm getting way off topic on this one, but like I said, I know, going back to
we never stay on topics. Don't feel bad.
No, like to the Brits, and like I said, even on with all these cultures, that's one thing that they said, is how do you feel about culture? And I said, well, because we got into that discussion, and a couple of them were like, well, what do you believe? Because you got into everything, right? You got into COVID, you got into this, whatever it was, Kale, you name it. Actually, the first night we were there, it was so funny because we had there was 6 different countries in one group. He said, well, let's start. One guy brought it up, and he said, let's start with vaccination. What do you guys think? I'm like, okay, getting off to a light topic, guys here.
And COVID go.
Yeah.
And it was, right? Everybody's
Tim's favorite question is, why do bad things happen to good people and go? And
but but it was great. And so when they got into that discussion, I just said, well, our culture, I said, and tradition and everything like that, I said, at one point was very much stolen. I'm very thankful for the house that I got raised in, that I had the parents that I was raised by, because that set the tone for my life, right? And I realized that everybody didn't have that, and we have family that are Métis, we have family that are First Nation, and on my mom's side, there's First Nation out in Ontario, Métis out in Ontario as well, and obviously our family is spread across BC, but predominantly that's where most of our families were from, were Manitoba and Ontario. But when I look at myself as a person, and obviously someone who is a Christian, I think, I'm very proud of our culture. And so, I've heard some crazy stuff, and you see people on YouTube. One guy was saying, you have to do this and do that, and don't wear this dress, and don't go to powwow. I'm like, I'm like, that's tradition. And when you look at the jingle dresses and stuff like that, and it's easy to get wrapped up in certain things. It's easy to kind of go off on these crazy, these mindsets that you're trying to develop off of things. But when you understand tradition and culture and something that was stolen from somebody that that is a part of you, you learn to have that respect. And obviously, like I said, it's making sure that you have that measure. You know who you are in all aspects. But it's something that when you look at it, if somebody ever came here from we'll say from the Orient, and if it was New Year's Day and they had the dragon flying around, no one would think twice. No, right? Nobody would mock at that, And if somebody came in, we have guys in our church dressed in traditional African garb, right? And one of my buddies came like that, and that was one thing that was cool. The final dinner, everybody came in traditional garb, which was cool. Yeah. Except for me, I was like, why didn't I bring something? You know what I mean? Like,
so jeans and t-shirt aren't Indigenous. What?
Oh man, and so I looked and they're like, why did and I don't think any of us did that were from Manitoba. Now I think back, and maybe Noah did, but I think he actually might have had something. So, but like I said, it was. Maybe I had a piece of moose meat on myself. I don't know. It was, but it was so cool to see everybody out there, and that's one thing with the First Nation. It definitely would have. And ultimately, rounding back to this, just to finish my thought, but it's just I feel like there's a lot of people out there that are they tiptoe around that discussion, right? Like, because if they're seen as a powwow, they might be seen as well, what do you believe in all this? And you're judging somebody again, right? And really, it's a hard issue. But when you're at functions and events like this, I mean, really, I want to, like I said, I want to get to know my people, where they came from, right? I mean, it's. You'd be stupid not to want to know where you came from, 100%. What your culture was, and honestly, to be able to identify with somebody, right? Because as you all know, I'm not East Asian. Although some people that I've had in the past that are friends have identified me as that. They've said, "Are you Greek? Are you Spanish? Are you this? Whatever?" Right? Especially when I tan a lot darker in the summertime, right? You get all those. But
sorry, it's looking like me in the summer.
I can see how you'd be related. But,
but and like I said, there's something special about having your culture, knowing your culture, and not being afraid to showcase that, and to what I mean, and really that's how I feel you form who you are, and especially, and I believe that's how I can relate to a lot of people, when we get on those topics of how do you navigate that, because obviously, the whole thing about love, accept, forgive, because I genuinely care, but really because I'm not afraid to go into those things. And there's some stuff that I don't get into, obviously, but in terms of entertaining and befriending and whatever, that's just a part of who I am, and who we should be. and take all religion out of it, but just as a person, and how you navigate with somebody, you should be a genuinely caring person.
That's
first
right.
and foremost, and
For sure.
and anywho, but I'll let you.
I'm going to interrupt your interruption because I want to ask you a follow-up question, and if it's the same question, I do apologize. So when you were talking, thank you for that answer. That's awesome. It's an awesome answer, and it's awesome that you got that experience. Not everyone does have a chance to be in your position where they can be in that position, and I think sometimes people are looking for that conversation and they don't know where to get involved. But my question is this: you brought up a little bit of country too. So with all of the history that we have in Canada with the Indigenous people, and we acknowledge that there was some things in the past that we are not really proud of as a history, as a culture, as a nation. And people say you shouldn't be a proud Canadian because of that history. And now we brought 3 identifiers into the conversation. We have Indigenous, because all 3 of us are Indigenous. We have Canadian, because we just brought that in. All 3 of us are Canadian. And all 3 of us are Christian. All 4 of us are Christian.
I'm also Canadian.
And Canadian, right? So is it possible?
I was born here.
I'm sorry.
He's a Brit for today. Okay.
Is it possible to be a proud Christian, Indigenous Canadian?
So you're looking at one right now.
Who wants to take that one?
So absolutely, I believe it is, and it's. I feel like media plays a strong role in the narrative that's pushed.
No.
And, and so, when you think of freedom, what do I want to get into here? In this country, because that's what my ancestors fought for, your ancestors fought for.
Yep.
And that is what, during the war, united a lot of us. Obviously, I know there was some mistreatment. There was some, some of my people came back, and whatever, they were treated in a certain manner that should have been. It was very unbecoming for a war hero coming back here. But thankfully, in today's day and age, all the vets are honored the way they should be. Mm-hmm. And at this point in time, there's a lot of mistakes that are being undone. But when you talk about being proud, I'm proud of our family that fought and died for this country, and so there's definitely a difference depending on which route you want to take on that, because Canada as a country versus the treaties and the treaty territories and who owns the land. Now, in terms of myself, I would fight if I had to. If I was drafted, I'd fight and die for this country in a minute, because this is where my family is. This is where my community is. I have no issue whatsoever with that. And I think it's the narrative that's pushed that says, if you want to be, say, a proud Canadian, well, you're not a part of this, faction of society. And I don't really believe that to be true, because there are, and obviously within the First Nation community, there's still a lot of hurt because of what the country represents, right? The colonization that took place, and from a First Nation perspective, when you look at the treaties, well, there's a whole different government there, which is where that narrative is coming from, and that's why First Nations, they don't, in terms of provincial governments, it's a very different discussion when it comes to the province versus the feds, because they're going government to government. Yeah. So they're not under the government of Canada. So that's why it's almost like a tricky question of, where you're from. So if you go anywhere in the world and you say, well, no, I'm not from Canada, right? And say if you're a First Nation from Treaty 1, however you want to announce it and whatever you want to say to somebody, they're not going to know. The second you identify as I'm a Canadian, well, then they know where you're from. Yeah. Right. And so, but it's like, even like I said, I was surprised, and I shouldn't have been, but I was surprised when some of my friends from India had no idea about my background and about anything about us. They've never been taught in school. We've been taught about them. They haven't been taught about us. So there's a failure in the education system. What is being hidden? They always say the victors win.
And they make the rules.
And they make all the rules. And they make all the history. And it's very true, because for years, they talk about, social studies, hunter-gatherer. There's nothing about, the assimilation that came about as of colonization, right? And anybody would say, well, no, that's they're stretching the truth, and they're trying to get out of the history. I mean, aside from all the text and everything that, that's proven it. I mean, you look at the amount, in the city today, we have Indigenous, which is that terminology that groups, the Métis, Inuit, and First Nation. You also have a large section of non-status Indian, which they're not a part of treaty. They're not a part of Métis. They're not a part of Inuit. They're their own section, their own group, but they're very much First Nation, or Métis, or Inuit, whatever their background is. But they're just not recognized. So where do they fit in? Where is it subsection? So anywho, and I know I'm getting off on that topic, but how do they identify? You know what I mean? And so when it comes down to identifying as someone who's a proud Canadian, well, I live in Canada, right? Whether you want to say that you're not a proud Canadian because you identify with the West as opposed to the East, right? That's a whole different narrative too.
Yeah.
Because like I said, it's context, right?
Yep.
Like Quebec wanted to separate us, still wants to separate. Trudeau made whatever announcement it was that you're your own separate area. Yep. They failed to recognize that the French came here after the First Nation did. So what Trudeau did there, I think, is a dishonor to the First Nations that were there before them in the first place, saying this is your land. That's a whole different, like I said, it's context. And so, but in terms of somebody who is proud to be here, because like I said, our family that served, they would have said that,
They're
like
proud.
I said, some of our old families, absolutely, because they fought, they died for this nation to make sure that their kids could be free, and their family could be free. And, and some of the vets I talked to today, obviously in society of today and with reconciliation that's taking place, I think it's great. Major strides are taking place, but it's, like I said, it's that political narrative that can ensnare somebody just for making a comment about it. And everybody's like, oh, this person's awful, they're terrible. But it's like, no, when you come down to it, like, you have your core beliefs, you have your, what you're proud of. And, in a country where we should have freedom and free speech, and you should be able to believe what you want to believe in this free country and free society, nobody should, number one, label it as hate speech of just saying like, hey, no, I'm proud to live here where I live, because, and especially with what, say, we're doing, like with what our organization is doing, I consider our organization almost a tool for reconciliation, because you have the province of Manitoba, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, and we're united in that front to come and try to undo a little bit about of what took place in that history, where we're going to be helping to bring restoration, right, to people who are hurting, right, and people who have no other option. And here we come. We can be that whatever, that white knight that comes in there, shining armor, and says, "Hey, you do have a way out." Right? Even though you don't have education, you have, you've had a past. Whether you've been a criminal, whatever it is, and we have some amazing entrepreneurs that showcase that even right now, one of them who was called by Krista Freeland saying, how are you doing this? How are you, helping to restore the lives of these individuals who are, previous addicts or previous criminals, and she has such an amazing system that she set up within her restaurant to help this and to help our people to get ahead where nobody else would probably provide that. And that's one of the businesses we hope to start. And I'll tell you, when you have things like that, obviously it makes you proud of where you come from, and the thing is, like, nobody should forget where they come from, right? You know what I mean? And but like I said, it's how to navigate that. It's tough in today's society, because all you got to do is say one wrong thing and they twist it on you.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? And if someone ever,
you can be relabeled right away.
Absolutely. And so when somebody comes up and says, well, do you think it's right that they should have, say, Noe-Odena, the Cap Young Barracks? I'm like, geez, absolutely. And they fought hard for that land. And I had somebody, even talk to me about that and said, well, they should have given it to someone who could actually develop the land. I'm like, you don't think they can develop it? And it's like, because they don't realize what First Nation business is capable of.
Yeah.
And the other thing I said, you're going to just want to give it to another rich developer that's going to have, I don't know, some sort of political favor. Here you go. Here's a nice chunk of land. Go get richer than you've ever been, because you already are. And it's like, why not why not give a chance to the First Nations?
Use it as a tool.
Absolutely. And say, you know what, hey, here's some of the most prime real estate. We want you to prosper. We want you to have that generational healing and that generational prosperity, because that, really it's society. And there's a lot of people who still have negative views about it. Right. And I still have comments made to me, in regard to the work that I do and who I am. And there's still people who are like, they're just lazy,
So Nelson, I have a question for you. If you today, let's say today you're starting over, and no, let's not even say that. Sorry. Let me ask it in a different way. You have one chance to help out everybody today. If you could give one piece of advice to everybody today that was going through what you were going through as a child to get to where you are today, what would that piece of advice be?
Hope. There people, as I just mentioned, the core, and the north end and the west end, and it's getting a little wider.
Yep.
So we want these people to have hope. Hope, you say, well, they want a job. They don't want to be the shiftless Indian, for lack. But that's the thing we want to get away from. And this is where my son and the people that he works with are trying to do.
Yep.
And focusing on that to build from the outside and bring them in.
Mm-hmm.
Bring those young people in. We're incarcerating too many of our people.
Mm-hmm.
The 12 to 13-year-olds that are in the Manitoba Youth Center. Okay, I believe there's about 80 to 99% of the youth in the youth center that are First Nation or Indigenous.
Okay.
Okay, and that has to change.
Yep.
I think in Edingley is about 75% Indigenous. Stony Mountain is 65 to 70% Indigenous.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at the wealth of workers. It's not because they were born criminals.
No.
They want to become. But first of all, they need that hope when they're 7 years old, when they're playing in a little mud hole in the north end.
Mm-hmm.
They want somebody to pick them up and say, we'll teach you.
Yeah.
You're gonna do good in school. But how are they going to do that if the city keeps on promising, the province keeps on promising, but they break their promises?
Yeah.
I've seen it. When I was president of the Indian Metis Friendship Center, that year the Conservatives were in power. They took 85% of our funding off. That was in 1996. But no, they want to get rid of the gangs.
Yeah.
They wanted to get rid of the boys, all those killers and those robbers. But he can't do that without giving those children hope.
Yeah.
As my son is doing with his organization and the many organizations in the city that are trying to build a better life for those little guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I forget who I was talking to just the other day, but they had the exact same scenario where they had, I forget what the crime rate was, and all they did was they just set up a program. It was I think it was like on a Wednesday night, and all of a sudden you would see that crime rate that was just spiked throughout the week. Wednesday dropped because they created a program where these kids would come at maybe it was Colin when I was in BC. Actually, I think it was Colin that was telling me this, my brother, and he said they had this program that you had a ton of youth that would go out, whether you're stealing cars, break-ins, whatever it is. Their focus was now on focusing toward this movie night that started getting popular and whatever else they had involved in it. And after that Wednesday, things would kind of start to trickle back up, and then the weekend would go crazy. And they started seeing that trend that took place and realized that if you just give these idle hands something to do, that everything can change with their lives. And so they started developing these different programs and instituting things. And that really is how you bring about that change, because when you don't have that, right, I mean, your whole society, it's going to come. I mean, I look at myself. I mean, thankfully, I was, I wasn't involved in a lot of stuff that, some of my cousins was in their early years. And I have these discussions with them, and because we're real about that. And, they saw the direction that they took versus the one I took. And like I said, I'm thankful for my parents' leadership in this and some of the other mentors I had in my life too. And, but if I would have went that route, there's no way, if I didn't have the parents I had, there's no way I'd be where I am today and who I am today. Because as you mentioned earlier, who you hang out with is who you become like. But when you start getting those people in those positions that can mentor, that can give back and give that time, that's what will really create that change and bring that strong positive impact. And going back to these kids and programming that you take away, people do try to make magic work out of nothing, but that habit insanity of doing things you've always done the same way, you're never going to get different results. So having the programming,
I see somebody like Pastor Phil, who does the inner city, and he said during the 2020 to 2022 season was very tough on him because they couldn't do in person. And he saw a lot of people turning to the wrong direction because they didn't have that spot to go to anymore, right?
Absolutely.
And then they actually they reinvented how they were doing their services because they knew there was a different way to do it downtown than there was to do it in the main campus, right?
Right.
So I think what you're kind of leaning towards is similar to what they were doing in the inner city. Is they're giving them something for their idle hands, right? They're giving them that hope, right? So it's kind of going hand in hand together, where not only are they giving them something to do, but they're also giving them the hope that by doing this, they're going to follow a different pathway.
For sure.
Right?
That's right.
We talked to Drew Dudley specifically, and this goes back to what you were saying about when you don't know. We asked him the question, when you don't know anything other than what you know, how do you make those adjustments? How do you make those sharp turns when all you know is either alcoholism or you don't know how to become a good father? You're not taught those things, good husband, good father, those kinds of traits. How do you break those cycles when that's all you know? And he didn't have an answer for us and that just goes to how difficult it is. And some of the things we're talking about, you had mentioned, well, this is only 100 years, 50 years, I think you were mentioning.
Like I remember Christmases when my dad drank, and a little early at Christmas Eve. By the end of the night, the Christmas tree would be on the floor. Yeah. Those are really.
Yeah.
Excuse me, but
no, that's okay. Take a moment. But it goes.
It hurts.
It's Tim's fault. You said he does it.
Yeah, but
my dad always told me this joke. He said, he's like, there was fighting, there was screaming. He said, now it's just at our house.
but again, and this is why I wanted to have this conversation, because, like you said, it's only been a certain amount of years. I think you had mentioned 1964, where the Indigenous people were considered human beings. I imagine that means they were first given the vote. Is that what you're referring to? Right. And we're talking about 50, 60 years. To break those habits where it takes a long time. And you broke that habit for your family. And we talked about this earlier, but that's why I want to have you on, because you were able to do that.
And again, in bit criticizing my dad there, my dad was a lovely person. And he had, again, a bad habit, which is drinking. But that came from his early beginnings.
Right.
His marriage and everything. He respected my mother, and he done really well. But he tried very well. But like I said, came Christmas, and everything would be destroyed the next morning. And we didn't get too much for Christmas.
How hard was it to break those? I asked you how you were able to do it.
Exactly, and this is what I was going to get at, is that I seen it, and I broke it because something about possibly the good Lord had a way in there,
Yeah.
and he took me. Well, the bar I used to go to back when I was in my early 30s, I'd do my little weekend thing, and took me away from there. And then my son was about 6, 7 years old, and I said, and my daughter was about 8. I said, Nelson, take those chains off yourself and become a man.
Yeah.
And start paying attention. Not that I didn't pay attention. During the week, I was home and I was working. I was working in motor coach industries for 30 years. But there was those years where, run free and, and do not too good things on the weekend.
Yeah.
Okay, and not that I was proud of drinking, but...
When did you first get your job motor coach? How old?
Oh, I started there in 1985. And prior to that, I was working building machine sheds for farmers.
Okay.
And but I took a trade. I took a course in machine operating, and then I got that job. I think at that time they started me off at $10.25 an hour, and that was a good wage.
Oh, yeah.
That would have been actually.
That would have been a very good wage at that time.
Yeah, so I was really proud, and next thing is that in '88 we bought a home. We still have that same home today.
Yeah.
But my children were positioned in one home, not like me. When I was 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, I think I had a different home for every year.
Yeah.
We're moving constantly, and
So you were putting a constant in your family. You were putting roots in somewhere.
that's right. And I
You
built
made
those
something that
roots,
was
and again,
always the same.
I thank my dad for what he tried to do, and it's not without trying. And same with my mother. She's a very hard worker. But again, when my mom was a child, she went to a convent, and they never taught her how to read or write.
Yeah.
They taught her how to clean. They taught her, well, because she was native, they said, well, what is she going to do with reading and writing?
Yeah.
So teach her how to clean a house and wash blankets.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what she did, and she never learned how to read and write. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well.
Yeah.
Well, and the stuff that happened to you as well, always not unsavory. I'll never forget the story that you told me when, because they give him the strap, right, when he'd use his own language in class, but then he'd pull it away, right? You get back at them because they smack themselves.
Yeah.
And I enjoy those things because it's that fighter spirit which thankfully I got instilled in me because my dad's always been a fighter. And
So you were the original rebel in the family then.
Always the original fighter too, and we've had conversations like that, way back in the day when he had some.
I fought my. Yeah, so I was raised fighting. I think I went and took boxing just so I could defend myself in the North End. And I got pretty good at it, so I kept on going.
Yeah.
But I remember at the last time I was asked to go to the Indian Métis Friendship Center to receive an award on their 50th anniversary. I went there, and I didn't bring a car because I knew I was going to have maybe a couple of beers in there.
Yeah.
And so I stayed there, and then I was going to leave and take a taxi. And on my way out, I sat down beside this lady as I'm sitting beside my son right now. But all of a sudden, this guy, out of nowhere, comes and he shrugs on my jacket. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I have a problem. And he gave me a real bad look, and then he walked away. So I asked the lady next to me, I said, do you know this man? She said, that's my boyfriend. I said, I'm waiting for my taxi, right?
Yeah.
And John, this young man that worked there, he said, Nelson, your taxi's here. So I'm going to the door, and this big shadow of a man just stands in front of me. He says, you're not going nowhere. And I'm 55 by then.
Oh.
Okay? So I said, excuse me. I said, my taxi's waiting. You're not going nowhere. Big red-headed curly guy, and he's pretty chunky. So I told him, I said, man, I'm going. Next thing I know, he tries to swing at me. I rolled over, got him around the belly, and threw him over. So I pinned him. And I pinned him, excuse me for entering him, but
No.
I pinned him, and then he was snorting and everything, trying to get up, but I had him pinned. And finally, I let him go. I say, let go, you're going to be a good boy there, okay? And he didn't like that neither.
Yeah. You were egging him on even more.
So he got up and he kind of walked away, and then he come back and he tried to swing at me again, and I got him in the same manner.
Oh,
Again,
yeah.
I picked him up on the ground, thumped him on the ground. And so it kind of ended that way. He finally got up. He was just right out of wind. But I was 55 then, and
Yeah.
I was still, I guess, taking care of myself.
Yeah.
Right.
But hey, which is good.
a couple
It could have been a different story.
That's a great story.
Sorry for
No, that's a great story to end it on here, because it's like I said, I think you're the original rebel. Fabian is just following in his father's footsteps and putting his kids into jiu-jitsu and all that other kind of stuff as well, right? So it's good to defend yourself and to
it definitely is.
and to also defend yourself in a
Not look for
like-
it, but to defend yourself.
but defending yourself also in speaking, right? So you guys are speaking up for yourselves, and you're speaking up for your kids, and you're speaking up for your future. Right. And I think that's a very important thing for you guys, and I think that's fantastic.
So I also want to thank you guys for coming on. I think it's a really valuable conversation. And again, just the conversation alone, just to have that, I don't think enough people actually have. So I really thank you for your genuine answers. Awesome, the work that both of you have done and are doing now.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is it's
a positive.
a lot of the marketing that we're doing right now too is we're really trying to get our name out there, and it's this is why our engagement's more, our traveling is more, and because we're especially in the northern communities and some of the remote communities that don't have a lot of access, whether it be social media or the internet as a whole, right? And that's really where our programs make quite a big of a difference, obviously everywhere, but really giving hope to, like, I know we had talked about that and Dad used that term.
Yep.
And that's really what it does. When you see somebody start a business that says, I can do that, and providing that vision and that picture and painting that for today's youth, because that's what it's about, not saying I'm not going to be around here in 50 years, but I might be moving a lot slower. And but
we all might be.
But
You'll be 74.
you look at 80 years from now, what is that legacy going to look like?
Yeah, right.
How is everybody going to be positioned? And that's really what it is about, and
that's
I know
fantastic.
that we all feel that way, but
I'll be looking from up there.
and really that's the vision of the ECDEV that we do throughout the communities, is setting up that positioning and encouraging that model, because it's such a healthy model when you have a legacy mindset and when you're focusing on that next generation and building them to be better than you, and because I want my kids to obviously be way better than I was, throughout every stage of my life. And I want them to set up their kids. And that's the focus of this, is to help every one of these individuals, because like I said, we have some who are, they've had great advantages in life, and some who have had no advantages in life.
Every parent up there should be blessed like me.
And well, thank you for that.
And I think legacy is a really good word to use for describing what your family is doing. Just to be clear, though, we're just asking because we need sponsors for our podcast.
Thank you. Just sign here.
Okay,
So you got the contract?
So if you could just copies for and just because today's conversation is a bit more deep that we usually like to go to, we're going to end a little bit on a bit of a light. Is that okay? A little bit of a light way.
I appreciate the off the cuff style and all of that. Like even like for everything, especially because some of the political issues. Like when you talk about, are you proud as a Canadian? Right. Yeah. And because when you go deep into that, it's like it's context, right? When you talk about, like, say, treaty lands, and well, are you proud of what Canada did as a nation? When you look at it from a colonizer standpoint, I'm like, no, they suck. Like, like, it was terrible what they did, right? Like, and that whole system of government and religion that, like, destroyed a lot of my family, right? And, like, it's like, no, I can't stand it. But what we have right now as a country, and, like, us sitting here and all the friends that we have, all the relationships, I mean, no, like, it's fantastic. I love all my friends, all the people who I know, and it's but it's the same, really throughout a lot of the society. Anywho, but I appreciate the deeper questions, and it's great to be just kind of put on the spot, right, in all this, and kind of shoot from the hip, speak from the heart, and and like I said,
we appreciate the speaking from the heart, because you if you speak from the heart and it's genuine, it comes across as genuine, right? And we truly appreciate that.
Yes, I've certainly enjoyed this afternoon, and to say a little more about my wife and I, we take care of First Nation children. We have 3 in our home right now, and we've had one since he was 3 months old, and he's 15 today, and the other one is 33 years old. She's a young lady, and we've had them in our home. I think Dana we've had in our home for several years also.
Okay.
And we take them to learn about their culture, which is, in all essence, my culture too.
Yeah.
But in the Metis community, we have the Red River Jig. Still trying to teach my son.
I've seen him dance. I know it's not easy.
And, I think it might be a lost cause, actually.
But no, I
now, if it was a fishing thing, he'd be all over it.
My dad fished on Lake Manitoba for 30 years. But no, I really appreciated this afternoon, and someday we may be able to do it again. Though it's a wonderful. I enjoyed it, and I thank you very much.
Awesome.
You.
Well, thank you.
I'll add one thing onto that. I guess that's something else that runs in the family is care and compassion, because we also, I don't know how I ever got into this, and actually, there's even some one chief in particular that not that you fostered his daughter, but she stayed with you guys through university, and that was a chief from the Interlake, and it's funny because it's like it's full circle.
Yep.
Edit his name out. No, he'd probably be fine with us saying, because all I'm going to do is toot his horn and say, he's a great guy and awesome chief. And honestly, when I get to deal with him, it is full circle, because he knows my dad, and that set the tone, especially for being able to work with their community.
Yeah,
like, it's so cool to go out there and, like I said, them know my dad, and honestly, like, it set the stage because they know him, so they know what I'm going to be like. At least they hope they know what I'm going to be like, and hopefully I've proven that.
I'm trying to teach him Anishinaabe, and he's learning.
All the
learning learning quickly.
But it's so cool, and
introduce yourself, son.
Like former Chief Bear. Oh, Indigenous Cause. Yeah, I should start with Buju Tenze. Indigenous Cause, Fabian said. Yeah, and it's like I said, that's a whole part of it that that obviously gets stolen from a community. My mom never spoke her language. My dad did, and I'll tell you, it's and so now that I'm trying to learn that stuff, it's it's definitely. It's a whole different feel about it, right? When you have that reasoning behind it. But yeah, like I was mentioning, some of the chiefs that are in the community, that was one thing that, stuck with me, how my parents would always take people in. It was never about themselves or even just our family, because we're a community. And that's something that's always been in the Indigenous community, is that it's a very communal, right? We take our family in, we don't want to put them in homes and, just kind of leave them there. We're not an individualistic society. And so even with ourselves, I fostered 2 First Nation boys. They're high functioning, intellectually disabled, and and tough to live on their own. But my boy Emery and James and they're just a part of our family, and it's great because we give them, one's from Dauphin Lake First Nation, the other one's Saugeen.
Okay.
And so it's great because it allows us to, like I said, it's a give back thing. It's also one of those one of those things that helps even build your kids and show them about, and honestly creates that humility and shows them that not everybody has the same things afforded to them that everybody else is. Keeps them grounded, right?
For sure.
You know, in this life, which is important on every level, never mind just within, say, the First Nation community or in any other household, but as a human, to say, this is how you treat somebody who is less fortunate. And it's great, you know. And we had something that happened to James the other day, suffered something, and it was so cute to see my boy saying, like, you know, James, are you okay? And, you know, and talking to them after about it, because I wasn't with them at the time, and they said, we felt so bad for James. And, you know, and just that compassion that it brings about, and the interaction between them playing video games together and whatever it is, right? And how, you know, how when they see somebody like that in society today, they're not making fun of them. You know, you see kids do that, you know, and you're brought up.
They want to lift them up.
Absolutely.
That's
100%.
awesome.
And so it's so cool. Anywho, but that just another thing that's passed down from this wonderful man here.
That's awesome.
You know,
Fantastic.
to this boorish fellow here.
So we're going to end on something light. We do this. We have to do this with you because we've done this with everybody else. So you have to be involved in this, and it's called This or That. And this is the first time we've had two people here. So you both have to give your answers for each of them. Before we start, actually, I want you to give me in 30 seconds. What was your first date with your wife? Where was your first date with your wife?
It took place in British Columbia. That's where I met her.
Okay.
And we had a beautiful night. And I guess I got my first kiss on that night.
You got your first kiss.
There
All
you
right,
go.
perfect. Fabian, go.
My first date with my wife. Well, we spraided. So you guys know that term. You ever heard that term?
No.
Nope. I'm glad you said no too, because I
So
I didn't want to be the only one that said no.
it's an old term. No, it's just one of those. You know, we springs dated, meaning we kind of. It was kind of a sneaky way, you know. Like I invited her out to go to a wedding, I believe it was, with me. And she might say, no, that's not the first day. Anywho, that's the first one I remember. No, but it was a wedding, you know. It's kind of like, oh, you know, maybe you should come along with me type of thing, you know. And just a sneaky way to get her out there,
Okay.
and for a friend of mine. And so it was great, you know, 'cause she got to get dressed up. I got to
Yeah.
get dressed up and stuff like that. And so the whole evening was great, except, you know, the part about that date was the fact that, you know, it may or may not have been somebody who I'd dated before. I think it was a wedding. It was actually anyway, so whatever. It was
So you
what
went
it
with her on
was.
a first date with the person that was getting married that you used to date? Is that what I'm understanding? Is that correct?
I think there was
Okay,
Does she know that?
or it might not have been. I'm trying to think.
Does she
I think
know
there was
that-
No,
one.
I like the story better. Just stick with that
Just-
story. I think
we're gonna
good.
leave it at that.
It was a sneaky way of us actually.
No more explanation.
you can't keep
no
going.
more explanation.
Fabian, we
You're
said 30
done.
seconds. Fabian, we said 30 seconds.
Sanderson's like to
I
talk.
might have messed up because we might have went shopping before that. But
Okay. Final
Shopping's
answer.
not a date.
Now, okay, so we're gonna start. You have
So
to pick.
if you want to hold the microphone between
Yeah.
the two of you
Yeah.
guys and just facing you.
And if you want to go into explanation about something, you can, but you can just say
Okay, sorry.
you're going to
I'll go
give this
quicker.
or
I'll
that.
go
You're going to
quicker.
give two things, and you have to
This is
pick
this.
them.
I'm being quick.
This or that.
Yes.
There's
So
no middle ground on this one.
Number-
And
first-
so just to preface this or that, as some people have seen this and some people have not, this or that is basically if you pick one, you don't have the other anymore. Okay, so you can only pick
you can
one
only pick
or
one
the other.
and you can't say both. You can't
can't-
say equal. That's against the rules.
Okay.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
Sure.
Instagram or Facebook?
Facebook.
Instagram.
Pizza or pasta?
Pizza.
Pizza.
Netflix or cable?
Netflix.
Netflix.
Okay, 3 out of 4. Europe or beach vacation?
Europe.
Europe.
Chocolate or chips?
Chips.
Chocolate.
A great game of golf or a great dinner out?
A great dinner out.
Great game of golf.
I knew that was the case
Because they're
for
few.
you. Jets or Bombers?
Jets.
Go Jets.
They go into the playoffs. Yes. iPhone or Android?
Android.
iPhone.
Hey, we got one right.
Yeah, sports. And this is live. Sports live or concerts live?
Concerts live.
Sports live.
Cold plunge or hot sauna?
Hot sauna.
Hot sauna.
Of course it is. That's cold plunge is torture. Tim Hortons or McDonald's coffee? Only coffee.
Tim's.
Timmy's both wrong. Staycation or vacation?
Vacation.
Vacation.
I'll pause for a second. What was the first family vacation you took?
Oh my goodness.
With the two of you. Which was the first one where he was alive that you took the family on? Can you remember?
Alberta.
Is that correct?
Alberta, yes.
Alberta. Okay. Best at code names, girls or guys? This is an inside joke, apparently.
This is really only Fabian that can answer it.
Guys.
Of course, yeah. You're right.
Okay. And the final question, Greg or Tim? I didn't see that one. Why did you put that one in there?
I just figured I'd like to know.
Oh, the last thing we say on the podcast.
So you can only have one, and the other one.
Hey!
Greg,
Oh,
I'll make you feel better.
It's okay. All right.
We both get to survive.
Fair enough. A survivor, yes, we both survived.
Thanks
Tag
again
in.
for coming on, guys.
Thanks again.
We truly appreciate it.
Have a great day. Well, that was our interview with the Sandersons, Nelson.
We had
Sanderson.
three Sandersons
We
on
had
the show.
three Sanderson, Nelson and Fabian and Timothy.
And it had nothing to do with the Mandela effect.
Yeah, thank goodness.
But yeah, if you like the episode, don't forget, hit the like, subscribe, share, get the earballs filled up with the Greg and Tim show. We appreciate everybody that's watched, and
Make a
don't
comment.
forget, comment. And we have another episode coming out next Friday.
Lots of episodes coming out.
So this is Friday that you're listening to it. Good job. You got us on the day that it came out. If it's Friday of next week, you missed out a whole week.
What if you listen to it on Saturday?
Well, then you're a day late.
And $1 short?
And $1 short. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.
Have a great day.
Thanks for watching the Greg and Tim Show podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with all your friends. Sharing is caring.